Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Rent Prep for Landlords. This is episode number 251, and I am your host, Eric Worrell. And I'm really excited for this week's episode. We have a great guest on the podcast. His name is Jay Papasan of Keller Williams. So if I'm being honest, this is probably like the 9th time I've already recorded this intro because it's kind of tough to put up Jay's career in a quick highlight intro. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from his website, give you a little bit of background on Jay before we have him come onto the podcast here. And Jay is a best-selling author, an executive at the Keller Williams Realty Inc., and co-owner of Keller Inc., Keller Capital, and Papasan Properties Group. His most recent work with Gary Keller, The One Thing, has sold more than 1.5 million copies and been translated into 35 languages and appeared on more than 500 national bestseller lists, including the #1 on Wall Street Journal's hardcover business list. So the message of The One Thing has resonated around the world. Professionals everywhere are searching for meaning in their work, clarity around their priorities, and everyday productivity without stress and complexity. So I'm really excited to have Jay on, and selfishly, I want to pick his brain because we're going to be launching a program here at Rent Prep on the Rent Prep for Landlords Facebook group, kind of a accountability program for people to be able to focus on one problem, one issue, one thing they want to get done that week. And I want to pick his brain on the psychology behind it, why is focusing on one thing, and then how do you find your why behind it. So without further ado, let's roll some of that sweet intro music and then get Jay onto the podcast.
Welcome to the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. And now your hosts, Stephen White and Eric Worrell.
All right, so we're going to kick off today's podcast here. I'm really excited to be here, joined with Jay Papasan of The One Thing and Keller Williams. How you doing, Jay?
Doing great.
Thanks for joining us. You've been somebody on our list of people we wanted to contact with and kind of pick your brain a little bit because your book has been such a huge success. And when I say your book, I mean, you've had multiple books that have been huge successes. But The One Thing I feel like has changed a lot of people's lives in the way that they approach their day-to-day, whether it be their personal or their business. So what I'm hoping to do here today on the podcast is to be able to pick your brain, kind of look at some of the insights that you have from that book, but also kind of selfishly use you to help us with a project we're working through here at Rent Prep. So how does that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay.
I'm one of the people, transparent. Just researching the book changed mine and my wife's life. So it's been a huge book for us.
Yeah. And researching on this interview, I mean, you guys, you put what, like 4 or 5 years into this book before it published?
A little less than 5 years. That's right.
Yeah, that's it's pretty crazy to think. Like now, the book is about one thing. If somebody hasn't read it, basically, it's really about like stop multitasking, stop spreading yourself thin, really be able to do deep work and focus on the things that matter. When you were writing the book, like how many other things did you have going on besides writing the book?
Oh gosh, we actually got distracted halfway through it and wrote another book. So the great real estate recession happened.
Okay.
And we felt like our one thing changed. And we wrote a book called Shift. And that was really how real estate agents could navigate that. So it took us off the case for about 6.5 months, which is one of the reasons it did take so long. But yeah, it happens. So we always had something else going on. That's one of the big misconceptions about the book is it's not, you only can have one area of primary focus at any given time, but we all have lots of plates that we're spinning, right? We're parents. We're sons and daughters, right? I've got aging parents. I've got teenage kids. I've got a job. I've got multiple employees. Like you do have conflicting sometimes priority. This is a book to try to help you identify your number one and give that more time and energy.
Okay. One of the things, and I'll tease this to our audience, I know in the intro I did as well, but one of the things I want to get out of today is we have this great Facebook group called Rent Prep for Landlords, nearly 10,000 landlords in it. And one of the things that I want to do is kind of create more of a kind of base it on the one thing and be able to help people just kind of have an accountability program within the group so they can declare on this weekly post, monthly post, whatever it may be, hey, this is something I'm working on and this is something I want to work on in my own life. So that's kind of what I want to pull away from this conversation today is get some of your insights on that. But before we get to that, I'm curious about your own story, how you got to where you are today, because I did a little bit of internet sleuthing, read your Wikipedia page. And from what I understand is at one point were you up in New York City working? Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then you moved down to Austin, Texas, and you're writing the newsletter for Keller Williams. How did you go from that to the point where you now have your own real estate agency? You are doing speaking gigs. You're writing these best-selling books. Like, where did that come from?
Well, the short answer is one thing at a time, but the long version is after I graduated from NYU and with a publishing master's, I went to work in publishing, and that's where I met my wife. So I was working at HarperCollins for the last, 5.5 years or so. I was in New York and met my wife. We got married. She's from Fargo, North Dakota. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. We both loved New York, but we were ready for a change. So we used our marriage as a jumping off point. And we quit our jobs, threw everything in storage, and went backpacking for about 5.5 months. Super low budget, but we had no rent to pay, and we decided where we were going to live. So out of that, we narrowed it to 2 destinations, one of them being Austin. We came down to Austin in January of 2000 from New York City. And New York City in January is cold and wet. Austin in January can be chilly, but it was like 80 degrees when we got here. Mm-hmm. We moved here without jobs. And so I'm getting to how I got to the job, the newsletter writer. I was freelancing after we got married. So I was freelance magazine writer, travel writer. And needless to say, at that time in history, it was a very hard way to make a living. I was not contributing a lot of money to the bottom line. And so my wife just said, you need to get a job. And I was like, I do, because I'm bored. Like I can only call so many editors and pitch so many projects. And I didn't know anybody here. So I took the newsletter job as a way to get some steady pay. And I thought I would still be a freelancer. And back then, Keller Williams was really small. There were 6,700 agents and 27 employees. Mm-hmm. So I was like bumping into Gary Keller all the time. That was kind of how a succession of things happened. That company was on a growth mode. So in just 2 years, I had multiple positions. I launched their support desk. I launched a research department. I got to work with Gary on different projects. And then I found out he was writing a book. And that's where I was like, hey, I used to work in publishing. And we connected in the summer of 2002. And in about, I want to say, a little more than 90 days, we wrote our first book together, The Millionaire Real Estate Agent. We self-published, sold 100,000 copies, which blew me away. I told him we might sell 50,000 if we were lucky. And that book has gone on to sell over 1 million copies. So that's kind of the point where we started working together. And I went from being an employee to kind of being a writing partner. That led first to my being made a partner in the publishing company. We formed a company. I became a partner. We've now produced about 11 different works, not all of them with our names on them. And that led to other opportunities. I'm parts of 2 coaching companies. My wife and I started real estate investing because we wrote The Millionaire Real Estate Investor, which you probably know about, right? We started our own investing, and that led her to start her own real estate team. That was my lucky break. I was like, hey, I'm writing about all these real estate agents, and you're really good at the investing side. Like I was helping a lot, but she was having to manage our flips because she was a stay-at-home mom. I was like, you're good at this. You should be a real estate agent. So in 2009, I believe, it's been just under 10 years, she started her real estate career. And, last year she did a little over 100 million in volume and 300 transactions. So
that sounds like a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's great. I'm like, she's going to be my sugar mama someday, I hope.
Yeah.
We actually compete now all the time, like who's going to do bigger. And it's great.
Yeah.
2 entrepreneurs in the same family. But that's kind of, when you say it all at once, it's like, that feels like a lot.
Yeah.
But it happened over time. And each time it just felt like that's the next logical thing.
Yeah.
You're going to go back to work. Why don't you start a real estate company? That's what our company does. That's what I've been writing about. So it all felt very logical as it happened. But you look up and you're like, wow, we kind of got a few things going on.
Yeah. When I was originally recording the intro for this podcast, I was trying to say what you do. And I found myself tripping up and re-recording because I'm like, wow, there's a lot of stuff to mention here. And it kind of got me thinking about an aspect in the book that you talk about, which is the domino theory, because It seems like you have some of that going on in your own career where you just said it. You're like, well, I did it one day at a time. Can you explain to our listeners what domino theory is and why it's advantageous for people to understand that when they're looking at their own career and what they're trying to do with their own goals?
Absolutely. And so this is like my kids' favorite part of the book. They actually remember it. So we were trying to explain this idea that you can only have one thing at any given moment, one priority. The word priority means actually first in Latin. So it's kind of weird when we make it plural, first. Like it's hard to even say. Yeah. So the metaphor we came up with was like everybody who's listening to this has lined up dominoes as a kid. And if you line them up just perfectly, what happens when you knock over the first domino?
Get a little bit of momentum going into the rest of them.
That's right. You can knock them all down if you line them up right.
Yeah.
And so the idea here is the battle cry is to line up your dominoes. And if you get your priorities in the right order, that first thing creates momentum and makes the second thing and the next thing easier and easier. And in the book, we kind of had some fun with it, right? The world record, and I haven't checked on this in about 12 months, but it's been about 4.5 million dominoes. And that dates back almost 10 years to the Netherlands. It was a huge endeavor. And then there was a guy, Lorne Whitehead, in 1980s, who wrote in the American Journal of Physics that a 2-inch domino can knock over a 3-inch, can knock over a 4.5. He essentially proved that every domino can knock over one that's 50% bigger. And that's the graph that's in the book, right? Where if you took a domino and let it grow that big, by the 23rd domino, it would knock over one as tall as the Eiffel Tower. Just 30 or so into it, it would be 3,000 feet taller than Everest. And 57 dominoes, it would go from the Earth to the moon. And that shape looks like a hockey stick on its side. And anything that grows at a geometric rate will create that shape. And the metaphor for us is when you focus on that first domino, just every day, not only are you getting multiple dominoes every time, but they get bigger. Momentum builds and it grows in unexpected ways. And we've graphed lots of businesses and careers, and really extraordinary ones tend to kind of follow that path. It looks like nothing's happening until things start happening at a pretty crazy rate. So I'll take that to a career. Gary Keller, very early on, loved to teach. He also enjoyed real estate. And so the number one way he grew his personal real estate business was as a teacher. And when he started Keller Williams, he didn't do one-on-one recruiting as much as he would go and teach continuing ed classes. And he got a reputation as the number one teacher in Austin. And he created this talent that started opening other doors for him. And most people don't know, like, he wanted to be a rock and roll star, right? He went to college right at the end of the 70s. He's getting out of college in 1979. He's got the Fu Manchu, the whole 9 yards, right? He wants to be one of the rock gods. And not that good, though. And his parents actually enrolled him in college, which I just can't imagine that he was not even focused on that at that time, knowing the man today.
Yeah.
And they enrolled him in college and he got a real estate degree. And today you look up, and because he focused on being an amazing realtor and being an amazing teacher, he's created what's the largest real estate company in the world now. We have 180,000 associates in 34 countries. That, compared to the 6,700 when I joined. So it's grown at this phenomenal pace. And now every year, his private band, right? It's just a bunch of guys and a couple of ringers. They play in front of an audience of about 20,000 at our convention every year. So like that other thing that he wanted to have happen actually is kind of happening in its own way. So when you really stick to that thing that makes you special, it opens up a lot of other unexpected doors. I'm a French English major. But the thing for me, I said earlier, is writing that book with Gary. And when I proved that I could be a great writing partner and help him develop, help him teach a larger audience through books, that's opened up doors. I've been made a partner in a private equity company. That's where a lot of the other equity opportunities have shown up in his world. He brings me in as someone that can brainstorm, create ideas, and get stuff done.
Yeah.
So, but I still can't neglect that first domino. If I become a poor writing partner, I can almost guarantee you that those opportunities will not keep showing up. It's by focusing on that first domino that you keep making those things happen. And I could give you 1,000 examples. Where would Google be, Alphabet now, without search?
Yep.
Right. That's, that thing, that center of excellence opened up all of those other doors for them. And they've managed to align a lot of them in crazy ways.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I found interesting too is researching for this interview, you had said that when Gary really first interviewed you, he asked you to see your calendar.
Oh,
is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was kind of vetting you with one simple question, but it seemed like he could see that you're a guy that had things scheduled out. So he understood that you had your, you were able to have your priorities set for you, right?
A big principle in the book is that really successful people don't just use their calendar to meet with other people. It's not an appointment calendar in that it's appointments with other people. The most successful people, the first things they put on their calendar are appointments with themselves to do their work. And so when Gary asked to see my calendar, it looked like a checkbook. It was one of those week at a glance that you'd stick in your back pocket. I'm an introvert. That's one of the reasons my wife kicked me out of the house. Like, go get a job, meet some people, because I'm an introvert, right? I can sit there with the book and my cat and be happy. my dog now. I don't need to be around a lot of people. And so my calendar always has reflected what I'm doing a lot more than who I'm meeting with, because without my wife, I wouldn't meet that many people.
Yeah.
Right. And so when Gary looked at my calendar, it was kind of a setup in my favor. He's used to working with realtors, right? The most social animals on the planet.
Yeah.
And he sees my calendar and it's like Monday, write this, Tuesday, write that. And it was all task oriented. And that's magic to him, because that's how he wants people to start their calendars.
Yeah. So when we're talking about the domino theory of like how you can get things done and momentum carries through your career, I think that's helpful for people, and myself included, because I think of my personal goals and sometimes they can become overwhelming and you can kind of see, all right, this is a day by day process. But one of the things that I personally struggle with is multitasking. I use Google Chrome. I have an extension on there that stops my tabs from opening up at 20.
Right.
And then sometimes I find that I end up having 2 windows. So now I'm at 40 and I'm like, stop it, Eric. And I have to sit there and just close things out and have to focus on one thing. Why do you think that people have this propensity to multitask? I mean, where does this come from? Because your book is pretty much saying do the opposite of that. Stop doing that. Why is it that people do this?
Okay. So it's hardwired for start. Multitasking fundamentally is your ability to notice something happening in the background. Right? So you're focused on this, but you are aware of this other thing. It might be an idea. It might be something literally in the background, and that draws your attention. So go back, to when our, forefathers and mothers were marching through the savannas, right? With their children on their backs and hunter-gatherers. If you couldn't notice a saber-toothed tiger creeping through the grass, you didn't survive.
Yeah.
So that is hardwired. And that's that instinct, squirrel, you see it. So we don't tell people to necessarily shut that down altogether. I don't know that that's possible. And I'll just say that there are engineers that make the apps that go on our phones, right? And they're paid a lot of money to find new and crazy new ways to distract us.
Yep.
Right? There is kind of a counter movement now for focus. So I usually say when you start your day and you hopefully launch your day with your number one priority. And so that would be your work priority. Or if you're at home on a Saturday, what's your number one priority for being with your family? When you're doing your number one priority in those big areas, don't multitask them. I usually, if you're in line for the movie, go at it.
Yeah.
Right? It'd be cool if we could all be focused all the time. It's very hard to do. So I usually ask people to partition a very small period of time and be really focused and see what kind of results. And I find that it's fairly addictive.
Yeah.
When you do focus and you get a lot of work done, it's very rewarding and you want to repeat that.
Yeah. For whatever reason, it seems like there's people want to be known as a good multitasker. And you bring that up in your book, and it's taught at a very young age too. I mean, if you just look at the school systems, you go to school and you learn about 7 different subjects. And even within those 45-minute classes, you're a 3rd grader, you're learning about 5 different things. And then you have 4 minutes to get to the next class, and then you're switching gears. And it's kind of an interesting, problem that maybe needs to be solved still,
Well, I mean, what I know is about 28% of our day is lost to multitasking ineffectiveness, and that's on the low end. If you're bouncing between screens, there's this idea that you see the new idea, you do the new thing, you open up the new tab. The reality is when you switch from one task to another, your brain has to go through this process of switching to the new rules. And if you've ever been focused on something, you're working on a spreadsheet or you're reading a book, or maybe you're watching a sports game and someone walks in the room and starts talking to you, and they're talking to you, but you're not processing it, and you'll kind of shake your head and go, I'm sorry, what were you saying? That's reorientation. We're rarely aware of it, but about 28% of our day is lost to it. I mean, how much could we do if we got more than a quarter of our time back?
Yeah.
We could take more vacations. We don't even have to use that time for work. So it costs us a lot of time. There is good research that shows that your IQ is severely impaired. People who are multitasking scored lower on an IQ test than people who were stoned. So it drops your IQ pretty effectively. So it makes us dumber. It cost us time. And I love the tab analogy. That's what I use in my speeches a lot of times. The moment you get switched from a primary to a secondary task, the longer you're on the secondary, the less likely you are to get back to the primary that same workday. So multitasking is how loose ends and extra tabs show up in your life.
Yeah.
Right? There are these thoughts that you never quite finish because you're skipping sideways. And unfortunately, your Chrome browser, the internet, it's made for shallow skipping. Right? You're just surfing from one link to the other. And it really is conducive to a lot of that. So controlling it is tough. I get it.
Yeah. I don't remember what episode it was, but it's a podcast called Hidden Brain by NPR.
Oh, yeah. Great stuff.
Yeah. And I think one of the episodes they were talking about the issue that the brightest minds in the world, these incredible engineers, are getting hired by Facebook to keep you on their platform for half a second longer. So it's like you do have this device that's so seductive that's sitting in, it's usually within arm's reach all the time. So,
well, think about YouTube. I was just, I've been reading Measure What Matters by Jonathan Doerr, which is a great book, by the way, fabulous. And it lines up a lot with our philosophies. And that one of the case studies is YouTube. And they measure their success in watch time. One of the things that just stopped me, the guy gave an example. If you want to tie a bow tie and you type that into YouTube, which video serves you better? The 1 minute how-to that clearly shows you how to tie your bow tie, or the 7-minute how-to that has jokes in it?
Yeah.
And they opted for the 7-minute because they felt like it not only told you what to do, but made you happier. But I'm like, oh, so it's all about how much time we spend on their platform, not whether we get what we want while we're there.
Yeah.
And you talk about great multitasking. They serve up your next distraction as soon as that one finishes, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I'm kind of laughing to myself because as I guess you could call it a side hustle, I do review videos on YouTube. So all that stuff's very relevant. So you look at somebody else's video and you go, all right, how could I make this longer and keep people on it longer? So they rank my video better. And exactly what you're talking about. You throw in humor, you throw in information, education, story, whatever it may be. So
that's been the conflict. We built a community for the one thing and we do training. And the irony is our community lives on Facebook. And that's a real conflict of interest for us because, we're trying to be about focus and getting your one thing done. And the most conducive environment for getting people to have a conversation is a great, place for distraction. So we're working through that. Like, we want our videos to be shorter, not longer. And that doesn't actually work within any of the algorithms that are actually moving your videos in front of more people because they're about watch time. So I don't know. Our world is geared for the other, and it takes a little extra work to kind of try to live the one thing. I get it.
Yeah, I have to kind of just go in for moderating our Facebook group sparingly because I'll just end up down a wormhole and just wonder how I got out to the other end. So
it's like a time machine.
Yeah. So speaking of the Facebook group, one of the things that I would like to do with our group is like have this weekly and monthly post where we're asking people to, originally when I thought about it, what I was thinking of, have you ever seen the show Modern Family?
Yeah.
Ever watched that at all?
Oh, yeah.
Right. There's this running gag in it where Phil goes up the steps and he trips on the one step because there's something wrong with the step. And he goes, I'm going to fix that. So my initial thought with this program was, why not have something where we say, hey, concentrate on one thing that's bothering you. One of those things that just kind of orbits you. And it's just, it's a little fly, but it's not enough of a problem to really do something about it. And that's what I was originally thinking about doing was, let's everybody comment below, identify the one thing that you really want to focus on, finally taken care of this week. But at the same time, if you're looking at a big picture vision, like you talk about in your book, and you're looking at 5 years and working your way backwards, I mean, those things aren't really going to help you accomplish that necessarily. How would you recommend structuring something like this for our group without going too far into the weeds? Because we're not doing what you guys do with the one thing at your group.
And you're welcome to do it. But the way I would recommend is, I love it if people can go out and look at their 5-year and someday goals and then work backwards. That means what we're focused on today. It's the goal setting to the now principle. How do you break down this big, crazy goal in the future to what's relevant? How do I behave this week so that I'm on pace to that? It's like that's its own process. But even in the absence of that, our whole culture in my company, Gary's culture that drove a lot of this, we call it the 411. And it's just one piece of paper. And at the top, you put your primary goals for the year. And then each month you ask, based on what I want to accomplish this year. And most people get annual goal setting. So we can just kind of drop right to that level. Based on what I want to accomplish this year, what's my one thing this month? Right? And based on my one thing this month, each week, declare what's my one thing this week in order to be on track for my month, which is on track for my year. And so it's just 3 levels. And usually you don't need to have more than about 3 to 7 goals max. because otherwise you're getting in the weeds. Those are not the big ones. You're talking about the primary goals for your business. And if you've got a big goal up there, know what's number one, know what's number two. And each month you ask, for my number one annual goal, what do I need to accomplish this month? And then each week you ask, for my number one goal this month, what do I need to accomplish this week? And that's how we kind of cascade our priorities. And my team, we do a 30-minute stand-up every Monday. And my goal is to find out, what is everybody's one thing for the week? We're aware of it. And in my one-on-ones with my people, we check in on, how did you do? How do you feel about that? What did you learn? And you're going to carry that forward if you missed it, or are you just going to write it off? And it creates a discussion. So I like the idea of, if you wanted people to participate in, what's my one thing this week? The key to that then is to step in the next week and say, how did you do?
Yeah.
And if they didn't do it, that's fine. The way to learn from that is to reflect on it for just a minute. All right. Did you set a good goal? Was it an appropriate goal? Was it really a priority? Because sometimes we don't do things because we thought it was a priority when we set it. In reality, it wasn't nearly as important as other things. And that's okay too. I don't want to let people off the hook all the time, but I acknowledge that can happen. So it just creates a healthy dialogue, not necessarily a scorecard. But if every week you're saying, hey, this is my number one priority, I find that when people are really clear about that, they tend to get it done because it is their number one priority and they've already declared it. So they're aware of it. And when they're aware of their number one priority, it does get a little bit easier to say no to the other stuff.
Okay.
That could work.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. One of the questions we got from somebody in the Facebook group, I think we could probably use it as a quick example here.
Sure.
This came in from Andrew Grant, and he said, for a real estate investor, what would be the first steps to be applying the principles of the one thing to achieve great results? So I was wondering if maybe we could take what you were just talking about and you might look at your year. So let's say he's a real estate investor and his goal for this year is he wants 5 new properties, right? You would just take that and say, all right, that's your year-end goal. Now let's break this up month by month. Or how would you approach that goal?
So if you need 5 properties by the end of the year, what do you also need between now and the end of the year? So in my experience, like if it's a seasoned investor, they probably know this. Like, do they know what their actual criteria for saying yes is? Right? That's a very big step. That's usually the first step when you're serious about investing, is establishing your criteria so you know it's a yes and everything that's a no. If you don't have your criteria, it's very hard to even find a property. But that will also dictate, like, how much cash do you need? How much credit do you need? Right? There's a series of things that you'll have to manage to buy 5 properties. First and foremost is, how many properties did you look at that were a match for your criteria? Because in my experience, I might look at 30, maybe even 40 properties that appear to be a match for my criteria, and I'll only make offers on a couple of those. And my offers won't always get accepted. So there is kind of a flywheel for investors, right? That if you know your criteria and you've got a way to lead generate for properties, you're not just staring at the MLS waiting for them to show up. You've got people bird dogging. You're actually knocking on doors. You're maybe putting out abandoned flyers, however you're doing it. So I would probably say you boil down your weekly is, what's that number one activity? Right? I'm going to look at 100 properties a week or 50 properties a week, whatever it is that you feel will kind of kick that process. And then each month I'll make at least 2 offers. And maybe you'll actually be on track to acquire 6 properties, not 5, if you've got the financing. I'd rather be ahead of my goals than behind them. Right? I don't want to have to hit my goals in December. So that is not a bad month to be shopping for investments, right? December, January, February. But I would work backwards from the big goal, figure out what's the activity that's most likely to drive it, and then hold myself very accountable every week to hitting that standard. Things tend to fall behind it. It's the same in real estate sales. How many appointments did you have with buyers or sellers, right? And sometimes people go farther. How many people did you have conversations with in order to find X number of people who might be buying or selling, in order to have X number of appointments, in order to get this many contracts, et cetera, et cetera? It's just an economic model. So for real estate investing, it's a little bit more collapsed because you're looking for people who'd be willing to sell their property.
Yeah. Jay, would you say that you're a logical person? Because that's the kind of the sense I get as you're talking. You're like, yeah, you just, you start here, you work backwards, and this makes sense. And as you're saying it, it makes sense. It's very simple.
Well, I mean, I think that's what makes me a writer. I think that Gary and I both are driven by data and logic. I have emotions too. I make horrible decisions all the time, just like everybody else, especially when it involves my teenage kids, right? You just like buttons get pushed.
They're probably emotional.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing like close family to get us out of our logic brain. So, but if I'm going to be a good business person, and real estate investing, even if it's a side gig, is a business. It needs to be driven by objective decision making. So remove yourself, especially investing, from the emotion. You do not want to get emotionally attached to some deal. That's how bad purchases are made.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's ever a time to be dispassionate, it's in real estate investing. So you have your criteria. It's either a match or it isn't. And if you've got a match, you've got a number that you can still make money on. And if they won't accept it, you've got to walk. But if you do that activity, find a criteria match, make an offer that works for you, some are going to get rejected, some will be accepted. And then those will be the ones that you close on. And I'm a buy and hold guy. Those will be your future rentals. If you're flipping, it might be a little bit faster pace, right? But the offer tends to be lower on flips, right? Because you have to find that margin.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have one last question that we'll wrap the podcast up with here.
Sure.
This came from our friend Andrew Schultz. He's a property manager and investor, and he said, "What do you think that the changing role of a real estate agent is going to be in the next 5 years? How is it going to evolve?"
Well, I know at our company we've made a big bet. We feel maybe it was 4 or 5 years ago we were masterminding with our top, some of our top 150 or so agents, and I can't remember the context of the discussion, but Gary basically said, you need to look and figure out who is the company that's going to put you out of business. And everybody went internal. You could tell they were thinking, like, who would put them out of business in their local market? And he goes, now go become that company. Just go do it. Go disrupt yourself. And when we asked that question, pretty much the universal answer was going to be a tech company for us. Mm-hmm. So we've taken a lot of flack for it. We've started moving that direction, but we believe that the platform of the future is going to be controlled by a company that hopefully sees agents as an essential fiduciary versus the opposite. There's definitely platforms out there. Uber, you're fiduciary, and that is not the driver. It's the platform, right? So we've made a bet that we can create a tech platform where the agent is still the fiduciary, but the platform does a lot of the work for both the consumer and the agent. So I would we call it the tech-enabled agent. So we're making a bet that agents will be able to do more volume, more transactions with help of technology, but their role is going to be reduced. And their price may be reduced. We don't know. But if you can do more, even at a smaller margin, you can still build a great business. But tech should enable us to serve more customers, and it will focus our service more towards the things that really matter. And I've seen the data every year. I mean, I think it's 98% of people who buy properties today are leveraging heavily the internet. And that number has just gone up steadily since around 2000. And every year, they're more likely to use a real estate agent than they were before. And what that tells me is when someone who only buys houses, right, every 7 to 10 years, and they're buying something that's the most expensive purchase of their life, they want a trusted expert. So what is the role of that expert? That's what we're betting is that I'm going to want someone who shows up with their, whatever their iPad equivalent it is, got an AI under it. I've got the data and I can really help interpret it for you. So that's where we think it's going, a higher level of fiduciary, but definitely powered by some tech. I just think that whether it's 5 years or 10, it's going to happen.
Yeah. I love it. As you were talking, it kind of reminded me of Uber because you mentioned them as a reference. I hear local radio ads for the taxi companies, which I've never heard before. And, they're saying things like, drive local and keep the money here. I'm like, people don't care. They want the convenience that Uber provides and the fact that everything's so convenient all the way through the process. they're not going to pick up the phone and call the local taxi company. And the other funny thing is they never advertised before. And now they're like, hey, don't forget about us. Yeah. And on the way to work today, I heard an ad from National Realtors Association, and it reminded me of that ad. And they're talking about how important realtors are. And they were making all these warm comparisons to saying all this great stuff. And I'm like, yeah, same thing as Uber. People don't care. They just want convenience, not with everything, but they want what they want in that situation. And just because you say you're better doesn't mean you're better,
No, and it's going to happen. The real estate transaction, you're an investor. We all know it's very inefficient. There's lots of paper involved still. Mm-hmm. And you have to go to all these different sources. It's going to be unified. It's going to be a lot more like buying a car in the sense that the transaction is going to be probably moved all online. It'll happen a lot faster with less paperwork, less hassle. That part, technology can help. The actual decisions on what's the best home for my family, right? Yep. And understanding the city and the nuances of neighborhoods. I don't see anytime soon, and maybe never, that even AI is really going to interpret that for us.
Sure.
We see like reviews on Amazon and Yelp. They're all gamed. Like a lot of that. So you need someone who's an actual expert who can help you for a decision that big. That's my bias. I'm sure there's an equal number of people on the other side of the fence who said, just give me the app. But we think that a human will still be a part of it if they're empowered and they're serving the customer at a high level.
I love it. Well, Jay, thank you so much for your time and joining us on the podcast. If anybody's looking to get in contact with you guys, I know you got your hands in a lot of different areas, but obviously check out The One Thing. You Google it anywhere, Amazon, anywhere you're going to find it. But where else should people check you guys out?
I would just say go to theonething.com with the number one. That's where I live, and I have for the last 6 years. With everything else that goes on, that's my number one. And that's why I'm on. Still, 6 years later, I'm here with you, focused on this book over all others.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again for your insights. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure our listeners do too.
Thank you.